those that I haven't met, my name's Josh. Previously, until 3 days ago, served at the Northwest Ministry Network with Zach. I helped Zach a lot. A lot of what you see in him, I'm kidding. Zach is a very good friend, and I was the Network Kids Director, so youth and kids, we work together a lot. But my wife and I, we have felt called to this work for a long time. 2 of our 4 kids we've adopted. My wife's parents have had over 100 foster babies through their home. I let my wife know when we got married, I can't do foster care because it'll just rip my heart out. I love these kids too much to have to give them back. And then I was 20 and we started the process of becoming foster parents and adopted our first kid. So I'm really excited for the presentation Kelly's going to be giving, but thanks for being interested in this. This is a needed work. It's a work that you need to be called to, but it matters. And Kelly's more of the pro than I am, so I'm just introducing you. But really, thanks for being a part of this. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
And thanks, everyone. I will do my best. I know that after lunch kind of talks, it's real hard to like stay engaged, dialed in, paying attention. I'll do what I can to help this move along. But one of the things that would help me to know is kind of why you're interested in this as opposed to the 7 other trainings and workshops that are going along. So I could probably tailor some of what I'm going to share today to maybe what you might be looking for and interested in most. So any brave soul kind of willing to share what brought you here and maybe what kinds of things you might be looking for in this. Yeah,
so for about 5 years, me and my wife have been talking about being foster care parents and eventually adopt, but we've yet to pull the trigger, waiting on God's word.
Okay.
But I think it's coming.
Okay, great. Thanks for being here. What part of the state or Idaho are you from? Okay, great.
Area.
So just as a heads up, most of what I'm familiar with is in Washington.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to kind of get your contact information and send you any information that I know of to you, so you can do some follow up if you need it.
Sure. Me and my wife have 2 boys. We have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my wife had cancer, so she went through a year of chemo, and she went through. I'm 25 and she's 24, and she went through menopause. So we can't have any more kids, and I'd like to have more. So we would like to adopt.
Okay. All right. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I guess the seeds of, a desire growing in me for being able to just help my community is being a foster parent. I think more for the teen age. That
There's
age
a
group.
huge need for that.
Yeah, and so I was actually really surprised that this was an option to sit in a class like this.
Actually.
I was not expecting that for this weekend, and it just seemed like, oh, perfect. I would like to know how to prepare. The timing's not right quite yet, I don't feel, but I want to start to educate myself and just prepare just a solid foundation in my own home. I have 2 kids, 12 and 14.
Okay.
And I want to be prepared for when the timing is right.
Yeah, that's great. What area are you from?
I'm also in Idaho, the Coeur d'Alene.
Idaho. Okay, great. Yeah.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the foster care system in Washington State for 16 years.
Okay.
I aged out of the system when I was 18. I'm currently a foster parent.
Wow.
I'm currently a youth leader at my local church, and I guess I was here hoping to gain some greater understanding of like people who may not, I've been out of. I used to be serving on a youth advisory board for Children's Administration for the state of Washington.
Yeah.
And
How long ago was that?
10 years ago.
Okay.
And a lot of like foster care to college scholarship programs. I've served on a lot of boards for foster youth, but I've kind of been out of it because it was like a place of trauma for me, but God's healing me in a lot of ways by placing foster kids into my home that are forcing me to figure it out.
They tend to do that.
And a lot of foster youth are actually newly engaging in our as a youth leader. Like I'm just newly engaging in our youth group, so hopefully gaining a little bit of understanding as to like what other people are people are learning, and I just foster young kids. So hopefully gaining some greater understanding about maybe like some teen challenges that are specific to maybe teenagers and middle schoolers and stuff like that that they're facing currently, because I've been out of the loop for a long time.
Sure. That's great. Kind of wish you joined your trauma one this morning, because we touched on a little bit more on some of the indicators of things, but happy to talk more afterwards if you feel like there's some specific things you'd like to know. Okay, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here and being brave. Okay, anyone else kind of? Yeah.
I work at a homeless youth shelter in Vancouver, and we get a lot of foster children in the shelter, and we just see like the kid side of it. And a lot of times there's friction between social workers and the state, and it'd be nice to see like the adult side instead of just one side of from the kid's story.
The adult, as in the foster parent side or the birth family side?
Foster parent and the state in general.
Oof, that's a whole can of worms sometimes. Okay, all right. Okay, anyone? Yeah.
I grew up, like, not in foster care, but around foster care. A lot of my family members do foster care, and my aunt just recently did foster to adopt for my new little cousin. And so I've always felt a call for foster care since I was, like, 11. I've always, like, been the designated babysitter for all the foster kids, but I guess, like, I'm here just so that I can learn more, because I'm not married yet, but, like, I know, like, the second I get married, I'm going to want to jump right into foster care, so just learning, like, the more technicality side, because I was, on the outskirts.
Okay. Thank you for being here. It definitely feels like, I've heard some of it already, but serving as a foster parent and adoptive parent feels like a calling. A lot of the times it's not something that you necessarily kind of just fall into, right? There's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of technicality to it, and just a lot of hard stuff that could come your way. And so I'm encouraged to see that I actually wasn't even sure, because this is the first time that in my understanding that this conference is offering a class like this, he said. So just wasn't sure what the interest might be, but it's nice to see that there are people that sense that calling and are wanting to understand some next steps. So I'll go through some basic things of foster care that maybe perhaps you're already aware of, perhaps you're not, but I'd like this to be kind of interactive as well. And I forgot to this is recording, so I will.
Can you just repeat the last 10 minutes?
I know, right?
It'll be fine.
Hey, we're here, and we're here to learn. So,
Totally.
okay. But I encourage you, if you have questions, and if I'm going over something that, it's like, hey, can you tell us a little bit more about that? I'm happy to do so. And we'll just kind of go as long as we can, but not too long. We'll honor your time. And I'm willing to make this more tailored to a more tailored discussion for those of you here. So thanks for being here. Okay, my name's Kelly, like Josh said. I work as a case manager supervisor at Olive Crest. So what I do is when kids come into care and are placed with foster families, they have a case manager assigned to the family and the kid to help support the family in whatever way they can until there's resolution for that kid's case. And so like I said, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of technicality to being a foster parent and to being involved in this way with whichever state you're from. So it is helpful to have a guide, have somebody that can help shed some light on different things. So if you're thinking about becoming a foster parent sometime soon, I highly encourage you to look into any private agencies in your area that you might be able to go through. Some families choose to get licensed directly through the state, and that's totally fine for some families. And for other families, I think from what I've heard in my experience, there's not the same level of support that they give the way that private agencies can give it. So just a little tidbit as we're starting. So foster care. Okay, well, how about we do this? Nope. Does this work? Oh, thank you. We were. What is foster care? You already may know. A safe, loving, temporary home for children who must live away from their family due to either abuse or neglect, or both. Children and youth who enter foster care come from culturally diverse families, communities, and backgrounds. The goal of foster care is to safely reunite children with their birth families whenever possible. So that's something that we like to just make sure that people are aware of. It's meant to be a temporary thing, although if you have a chance to talk with Josh, there are cases that go on much longer than anyone ever hopes. But the idea is that it's temporary, a safe landing place for any kids that may need it. And then we've got number 2, Child Protective Services files a dependency petition with the court if it believes a child has been abused, neglected, or is at risk of harm. So there is a legal case open whenever a child is brought into care. And what that means is that there are multiple lenses through which cases get looked at. And so there are multiple players within the child welfare system that are there for reasons, but also make the system complicated. So there's foster families, there's a state social worker, there's private agency case managers, there's something called a GAL or a guardian ad litem, a CASA, or a court-appointed advocate. It gets more complicated once the state is involved, and so that's another reason why it's worthwhile having a guide through a private agency. All that to say is that I would say Washington State as a whole has moved towards a more preventative stance, hoping that they can provide services to families that may be in crisis, that may be experiencing distress, and as a result, maybe sometimes kids' needs are being neglected, or even it's leading to physical abuse. So Washington State is wanting to provide services in home as much as possible to prevent kids from even coming into care. And unfortunately, it's still a need. So just wanted to talk a little bit about what the state's stance is. And then lastly, an active dependency case continues with continual court hearings and a permanency plan until a judge determines an appropriate outcome with input from various parties in the case. So like I said, there's multiple layers once a legal case is open for a child. Any questions around that? All that to say is, I think one of the things that might be surprising for new foster parents or prospective foster parents is that there are going to be more people in your home than you may like, because of the nature of what it is that has to happen. So, reasons why kids come into care. So, physical abuse is often there. I've got some numbers here. I think it's on the next slide, but inappropriate discipline, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, familial conflict, voluntary placement, and negligent treatment. I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to a lot of you, or most of you. I would say that physical, sexual abuse I describe as like acts of commission. There's actions directed against the child or acted upon the child, and negligent treatment is sort of an act of omission where kids aren't getting their needs met, their basic needs met. So, as you can imagine, kids coming from these kinds of backgrounds are probably coming in with some trauma. We talked a little bit about trauma this morning, and a couple types of trauma that we'll see is chronic trauma. So they've had a lot of exposure to either abuse or not getting their needs met, and complex, where there's an interpersonal kind of element to the abuse, meaning that they know the person, or they know of the person in the family. That is often the case. So those are some of the reasons why we would see kids in care. These are the stats that I was mentioning. And I would say these stats are about 2 years old. I want to say 2-3 years old. The need is great. So there's about 6,700 kids in foster care in Washington, 4,700 licensed homes. While both of those numbers have decreased, the number of licensed homes has dropped more significantly over the last year or two. For multiple different reasons. There's been some legislation that's been passed that's made it more difficult for families to want to stay licensed. And then the other reason is it's just hard. It's hard work. And I didn't, a little bit about me, I worked in full-time ministry before I got into social work and foster care. And I didn't grow up with much of a lens for foster care, but once I got into the actual work of it, I was like, foster parents are quickly becoming some of my heroes of the faith. Just people that kind of do what they do day in and day out, caring for kids as best they can, under the scrutiny of a lot of folks. And it's not really popular work, I would say, and it's not work that you come to sort of flippantly. It's very deliberate decision making that typically brings people into the space. So they have quickly become some of my favorite people and heroes of the faith, really. People that are walking out their faith day in, day out with kids. So kids are often placed out of their home and communities. I know Washington State is making a real push to try and place kids as much as possible within the communities that they're coming from. Just because the idea is that familiarity will help with some of the transition. Future risks and outcomes. Unfortunately, for some of our teen youth and maybe even younger, child trafficking is a risk factor. Incarceration, homelessness, having kids that may later go into foster care themselves, and higher suicide rates. Definitely a risk factor for this population that we work with.
Kelly, can I comment on that one? My first week in the office with Olive Crest, case came across a meeting that I was in with a 6-year-old out of our state in a different state, but that is already suicidal, meaning that this little 6-year-old has already tried to take his life multiple times. The reason I share that is, if you look at statistics, the chance of that 6-year-old living past graduation is slim. But when you move that into Olive Crest and that child being placed in a Christian home with Christian morals, that goes up significantly. And so one of the reasons I love what is happening at Olive Crest is the need is massive, but what's happening with our Olive Crest families is pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Josh. Yeah, I mean, it's heavy things that we talk about here, and not anything that you probably already haven't come across in some of your ministry or just living life, you know. But it's a space that Olive Crest as a faith-based agency doesn't feel like God is calling us out of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if anything, He's asking us to lean into it. Where people seem to be kind of leaving the space for what different reasons, He's asking us to stay and endure and be available, be a resource for kids for however long they may need it, as a sacrifice to a God who adopted us. So I think that helps us continue forward, and then stories of how our kids' lives are being changed by the care and love from our foster families is also a great encouragement for us.
Kelly,
Yeah.
I have a logistics question. You mentioned
Yeah.
Pursuing a private agency versus a state agency.
Yes.
So Olive Crest, I assume, is a private agency.
Mhm.
So when there's a case and a judge is determining what to do with the child, does a judge choose like private or state agency to handle the case?
That's a great question.
That's a good question. So, no is the short answer. A case goes kind of through. The state is the one that is designated the authority to be able to manage the case of a child. They can choose to place a kid in a state home, or they can choose to place a kid in a private agency home. All licenses are issued by the state. The difference between being licensed through a private agency is the amount of support that you get. If you go through the state, you don't have a case manager. You are the one doing a lot of the kind of contacting and managing of details with social workers and GALs and court appointed special advocates and all of those things. That's why I recommend that unless you have some familiarity already with the system and how it works, it is helpful to go through a private agency that can help navigate that alongside you. So, yeah.
Just another like kind of logistic, like obviously like private agency, I'm assuming comes with like a cost, like financially. What does that look like for the foster?
Yeah, great question. That varies across agencies widely, actually. Yeah. For Olive Crest, because our mission is to provide as many homes from the faith community as we can, we keep our costs low. And what we really want to be able to impact is foster care. And so when people come to our agency to get licensed, we don't charge them for their home study, which is a very deep kind of study of the home. We don't charge them to become foster parents because we want to remove as much barrier to that as we can. It's only after a case sort of runs its course and the child is determined to need an adoptive home that there is a home study fee at that point, because we try to cover as much of the costs so that it's not being passed along to foster families, because we need homes. But that's our kind of approach to that, but you will see it vary greatly across agencies.
So for Olive Crest, just to reiterate, if someone's interested in being a foster family for Olive Crest, there is no cost to them in that initial piece,
Not in that
unless they
initial
decide
piece.
to adopt. And are they still is there still support financially from the state for a foster family through Olive Crest?
Yes. So, and that gets worked out on multiple levels. So let's say a family comes in, they go through the licensing process. The licensing process can take typically between 6 to 9 months, depending on how quickly people are able to complete their packet, which is pretty extensive. And the idea behind doing a deep dive into a family and how they work and their resources is because when you're bringing a traumatized child into a home, You want to make sure that all the responsibility of that isn't going to tank a family too. And you're not putting them in a similarly risky situation. I mean, that's the idea behind doing a home study. And so the home study goes through every bit of like how a family disciplines their finances, how big their home is, cultural background, local, their family resources, do they have a support system? Kind of all these different areas get looked at and worked through together with a family to try and make sure that there's a solid base for a child to land. So that's why the process takes a long time. Yeah.
As far as like, you guys being, so when, do you know how long privatized foster care solutions have been in place in Washington State?
I know that I'm with Olive Crest. They've been in Washington State for the past 20 years at least.
35,
35 years. Okay. And then Youth for Christ, which is where I used to work, also had a foster care program that was also 35 years back about. So.
Are a lot of them Christian organizations?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't say so. I think we're probably
We're the largest in Western Washington.
Yeah, we're the largest
Second in the
private agent. They call us child placing agency. We're the largest on the Western Washington side, and we are maybe one of 20, I would say. 20 that I can think of, 15 and 20 that I can think of. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right, we'll keep going. Please feel free to continue to ask. Okay, so when a kid comes into care, so a family has gone through the licensing process, they've received their license from Washington State or Idaho, and they are now able and open to bring a child into care. These are kind of samples of the kind of information that we would know about a kid as they're coming in. So let's take a look. NR is a 10-year-old female in need of an adoptive permanent placement. She's described as very sweet and artistic, great artist, enjoys drawing, decorating, music, is on the autism spectrum, and is expressive with her thoughts and feelings. Follows directions, responsive to redirection, enjoys school, attends in person on Wednesdays and Fridays, has an IEP, is currently attending groups, and her current placement is working with her on feeling identification and self-calming techniques. The best placement for NR would be a home where there are older children or where NR can be the only child. Why do you think the state has included the best placement for NR would be a home where there are older children or where NR can be the only child?
I would think being autistic, there's a lot special needs are involved, and so that can be fairly overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a lot of other younger children who are also very dependent, it would put a huge
burden on
the parents. And so having older children who are more self-reliant, independent,
Yeah.
or out of the house, or only child situation.
Yep. Yeah. So I would say NR is a kid that we've got actually a lot of information on, and they're looking for an adoptive home, which means that she's likely been in care for a while and is at a point where an adoptive resource is needed instead of just a foster resource. Okay. So sometimes we've got plenty of information on a kid. Sometimes we've got very few. BMG is a 16-year-old female needing placement on 9/12. BGM is respectful, responsible, and is working, has a boyfriend, youth is new to care. And that's the information you've got to work with. That's it. So, So there's a wide range of need for kids, and sometimes we've got plenty of information to work with, and sometimes we don't. And so,
So question here.
Yeah.
This seems dumb, but like, do we get to pick, like, when you do the application process, is it like picking a range?
that is a great
Or
question.
is it like, we need a kid, you fit the bill, here you go?
Yeah, no, that's great. No, there's definitely discussion, lots of discussion. Or at least I can speak for all of Crest. There's plenty of discussion with the home study writer that happens with prospective foster families, because you know your own kids best. If you have your own kids, I think there needs to be some assessment done together as to whether or not, okay, I have an 8-year-old boy who's he's attached to me
Right.
if I bring in another 8-year-old boy, how would that affect, my biological son, let's say? Would it be most effective for that, or would maybe a younger child be better? So we have those kinds of discussions with you. Well, we also we can't regulate the kids that are coming in either. So while we get an initial understanding of your home and what foster families feel like they're ready to be able to welcome into their home, we sometimes also, we can't predict always the kids that come into care. I will say though that as a private agency, as we're working together with foster families and getting to know families good and additional stress, the additional stress that foster care can sometimes bring can be hard on marriages sometimes. So we are working and constantly assessing with our families kind of both a safety model for kids, but also a health model for the family as a whole, because it's the family as a whole that is providing an environment of safety and well-being for the child. And so we're looking out for you together, because this really is a partnership of ministry for kids. Yeah.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So, I definitely can tell just by the way that you've like placed these ages that like the 10-year-old is just as important as the 16-year-old, and the 18-year-old is just as important as the 12-year-old. But looking at the 18-year-old, what does it look like to be a foster parent for an older teenager who is their own adult, right, and still in the system? How long does that last? And what does a long-term placement look like if you're fostering an 18-year-old?
Great question. Yes, typically in regular foster care, kids age out of the system come 18 because they're legal adults. In Washington State, they have the opportunity to opt into extended foster care, which is an 18 to 21 program. So there's some
Is that new? Is that fairly new?
I would say it's been this past 6 or 7 years. It's been a program.
Maybe a decade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so kids, I mean, obviously, I don't know who was ready at 18 to just, I wasn't, to just kind of be out there and trying to adult at 18. But our kids especially that are coming into our homes are vulnerable, and they tend to need some extra supports, which is part of the reason why Washington has created that program. It's like we need to give them some extra time. And within that, there are parameters. One of the parameters is if you opt in, you either need to be in school or have a job to try and get kids ready to eventually become independent. Great question. Did I answer all of the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, you're helping them, like you're going to be like a foster family teaching them skills.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yes, there's a great, we've got ILS, independent living skills, which can happen concurrently with the EFC program. So there's, what ILS does is it teaches some of the basic skills that kids need to be able to, how do I open a bank account? How do I have my check go, from my work go directly to my bank account? How do I write checks? How do I budget? You know, those kinds of things that can sometimes get lost because kids were dealing with a whole lot more, severe things that maybe your average youth out there didn't have to.
And what's EFC?
Extended foster care.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So just a sampling of the kids that we see. So types of caregiving needed, there's a variety of them. We've got receiving care homes, and so these are homes that are like emergency placements. You call them any time of the day or night. They're willing, able to take in kids, and there's licensing capacity, so you can say, my home is open to 0 to 5-year-olds, and so they'll kind of try and stay within that range. So this is an emergency placement. So law enforcement goes out, does a drug raid somewhere. 2 a.m. in the morning, they find a kid there. They need to place them in a home. All of Crest gets the call. Hey, we got a 2-year-old that needs a home tonight. They're coming to you with a blanket, and they're not quite verbal yet. What do you got? And so we go through our licensed receiving care homes, and we start making phone calls at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. So, and these are short-term placements. So it's a place where the state puts kids until they can determine where's the next safe, best option for the kids. It's up to 30 days. A 30-day commitment can be extended up to 60 days. But some of our families, I think maybe, Josh, your relatives do receiving care,
Yes.
and have received over 100 kids?
Over 100.
Over 100 kids, yeah.
Medically fragile or special needs infants.
Okay, yeah. So that's receiving care. Long-term foster care with the potential for adoption is the next kind of step up. And those cases run the course of the case. And your next question might be, well, how long does a case usually last? And we're at a place where it's like it lasts for as long as it lasts. There is a federal mandate that cases have a permanent plan by the 15, or at least a meeting to come up with a permanent plan by the 15-month mark of a case. But under the pandemic, we've been seeing cases extended out a lot longer just because of all that's been happening. So, and then there's specialized care for medically fragile kids, special needs kids, hard to place kids, and those are, like it says, specialized calls. There's also a program that all of Crest has called BRS. Katie actually helped to get that program launched at Olive Crest. It's BRS stands for Behavioral Rehabilitative Services. And these are for the kids that need wraparound support. I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's they need deep supports that are that are specialized, trained, and there for the long haul. So, and it usually requires special training for foster homes to be able to receive kids in our BRS program. Then we've got respite care and in-home respite. So we've got families that are like, hey, I want to be able to help support foster families, and I got a home that I'm willing to also open up. And so we love when we've got families willing to provide respite care, and that's like foster family is going on vacation out of state, and their foster child has to stay in state to continue visiting with parents during the week. So we need a home that will have the kid for the next week until the family gets back from vacation, or whatever the respite need might be. So we need homes like that that are willing to provide care in that way.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the care networks that Olive Crest provides? I know it's semi-similar, but would you be able to talk about a little bit?
Care networks?
The care networks that we have with local churches, do you have much on that?
Yes. Okay. Care communities.
Thank you,
So
communities.
yeah. That's a new word. No, I can't, Josh, because I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, care communities, yes, is something that we've started maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, really pursuing, which is partnerships with local churches to come around foster families and be a support to foster families in whatever, cooking meals, helping to pick up kids from or getting to and from practice, sports things, bringing in maybe a care basket once a kid is placed, even like coming over and doing. We've had families that have taken in like sibling sets of 4, sibling sets of 5, and they're just sort of, you know, at their wits' end, and their lawn is, you know, overgrown and so these are people like, hey, I'm coming over next Saturday for a couple hours. We're bringing the community group. We're gonna get your yard done for you. You know, just practical ways to be able to serve and support foster families. Yeah.
Sorry, I have like 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
I just want to know so much about you. As far as like receiving care, when you have, let's say, teenage foster youth coming into care or without, and if something happens in a current foster home or they're just coming into care, what happens when you do not have a receiving care home for a teenager, or you don't have, the state can't find one with you, the state can't find one on the other side of things, and they can't find one anywhere, and there's no group homes available because you said at the beginning there's a need. So by there's a need, I assume it can't be met. So I guess my question is, what happens when there's no receiving care homes?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, because that happens a lot. We get creative at Olive Crest, and we'll dip into our regular homes, and we'll say, hey, you know, this is the need. You're licensed for this age. It would be a receiving care placement. We go through what that means. These are the things that would be required of you. Would you be willing to consider having it?
So you guys just make it work, kind of thing.
We try our best. We don't like kids.
Get creative.
Yeah, the alternative is that kids stay at motels with a social worker until a home can be found.
Are there some counties that are still using juvenile hall as a resource?
For housing kids? Not in the counties that I know of.
I just know in the past that has been like an option for teenagers, and so I was just wondering if that's something that you guys still see, or if you guys figure it out. It sounds like you're figuring it out.
Yeah, we're trying to figure it out.
The most I've ever seen in Pierce County is if a kid is in juvie and there's not a home, they might extend it a day or two, but they're not using it as an active home. The last I checked, there were like 6 kids in Raymond Hall because they're not keeping kids in juvie for crimes even. So that's not a resource, which is great.
Good question. Keep them coming too. This is really small print, but I don't know if you're familiar with Jason Johnson. He's a larger voice to the wider faith community world. Lots of experience in foster and adoption, and as you had mentioned, you know, it can be scary to maybe wade into this journey of foster care and adoption, but I think what we try to do is we put a ministry lens on the work that we do. And because of that, our appeal is really to God to help us. And the God that we serve sees our broken and hard places and runs towards us, not away from us, which is the lens in which we try to approach this work across the board to the best of our abilities. That we're not shying away from the hard teens, from the system boundaries or, you know, restrictions, but we're going to do our best to be a resource for kids who need it for however long they need it. And we're not always successful in helping every kid that comes across our path. But we're trusting God to help us each step of the way. And so it's part of the reason why we're here to share about it. And so just wanted to leave you with some of that. These are some of the basic licensing requirements. You must be at least 21 years old, ability to pass a background check, demonstrate understanding, ability, physical health, emotional stability, and personality to meet the physical, mental, emotional, cultural, and social needs of kids. And you have to have sufficient income to maintain your own family without foster care reimbursement. This is a particularly important one because I think there's this misconception out there that people are only in foster care for the money. And I can tell you, it doesn't reimburse you as much as you people think. You know, it is meant to be a supplement to care for to meet the needs of the child in your home. But you shouldn't be dependent on that stipend from the state to be able to run your family. That's part of the stability piece, providing stability piece for kids that enter your home. And then lastly, a foster focus. So I'm not quite sure why that is.
Adoption, I think, like if you're on adoption.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, so foster care, there is more of a understanding even widely in Washington State that what the state is really looking for are people focused on providing temporary support for kids. And so when it comes to adoption, while that may still be a possibility, the state is working really hard to reunify kids and their families. And so that is always kind of an element there to keep in mind. All right, there's a lot of collaboration that happens with churches. We talked a little bit about our community, what do we call it? No. Care communities, yes. Sorry. That's the after lunch lull. So these are some of the ways that even if you're not called to do foster care or adopt out of foster care, this is one way you can help. We've got a video here that I'd like to show you of one of our foster families, and hopefully it'll let us in. No, it won't. Sorry, but I could tell you that it was a really great video. Just take my word for it. So kind of outlines some of the foster parenting and agency support. Talked about it a little bit before, but we are, as you're looking over kids, we are looking over you and trying our best to help support you and get connected with resources that would help in that. These are some of our agency support pieces that we've got, and we've got a whole kind of step-by-step process that we can send to you if you'd like to know more about actually, you're at the point where you're like, okay, we're going to take the next step to start the licensing process. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today. Any other lingering questions before I turn it over to Josh? Yeah.
I have a little. So like I'm on the east side. So what does your presence look like over there? 'Cause I know that like you're based here. Or the west side. So like what does that east side presence look like for you guys?
Great. There's not much of one here. I know, I'm sorry. We do have a Spokane Safe Family, Safe Families, which is, we call it Safe Families, Strong Families. They recently changed the name, and so that program is actually designed to help birth families out before there is even state involvement. So let's say, yeah, okay, yeah. So it's a preventative measure, but we don't have a foster care presence yet on the east side. Yeah.
Is there a different licensing requirement, like if you wanted to specialize in like special needs or medically fragile kids? Like, is there a different licensing aspect? Like, do you have to be like a certain training or things like that?
Yes and no is the answer. I think it'll depend on that's more of a deeper conversation to have with the licensing program, but the basic requirements are what I listed for becoming foster licensed. But if a family chooses to say, hey, we have our own kid who's dealing with autism, and we'd be interested in, having another placement where we could use those skills, that's where the agency and the state can say, okay, this family is saying, like, they've got these skills to help with this need. Then we'll kind of designate that on our end. Great, well, thanks for listening. Josh kind of.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. Well, I hope you feel the opportunity to follow up. We'd love to talk with you as you're looking into resources. I know there was some financial questions at the very beginning, and really this is why I've said yes to coming to Olive Crest as the Community Engagement Director. The number one thing I oversee is church engagement. So if I haven't already, I'll be following up with your local church to be there either for presentations or to build some of these networks. Just for a little bit of a framework to understand this, last year Olive Crest raised $8.2 million just to operate. Now around $5 million of that was through grants, and then a small bit of that was through state funding. But then the other $3 million was through either private donors or our churches. So all of that happens so that we can actually get foster families in, and it doesn't cost them to be able to be a part of the process. So we'd love to partner with you. If there is anything else that we can do to help you, we would love to. So, East Side. So as she said, not yet. I think that's the important part. We don't have a presence in that area yet, but there are already dreams moving that direction. Yeah. Sound good? All right. We got one more session at 3. Main session in there. But thanks for coming to the breakout.